In this part, we deal with default parameters. Now, default parameters allow you to declare functions that have parameters containing a pre-filled value. Let's take an example. And still keeping with the banking theme, let's say you want to create a function that prints out checks. Now your function would need to take in two parameters, a payee being the person or business to whom the check is written to, and an amount of the check. Now normally you would always want to know these two pieces of information before you write the check, but for now in this example let's have a look at a function that would assume a default payee and a default amount in the event the information was not passed to the function. That was a mouthful. Let's take an example. An example will explain this clearly. I'm going to define a function called writeCheck, and it has two parameters: the payee, which is a string of who I want to pay the check to, and it has the amount the check needs to be written out to, which is in this case also a string. Could be a double, but I've decided I want to have it as a string. Now you'll notice that I've put in a value for string, and I've put in a value for the payee, and I've also put in a value for the amount. These are called default values. So for the payee, I'll put a default value of unknown, and for the amount of the check, I've put in a default value of 10 dirhams. What is the purpose of this default value? If the user of this function decides not to put in the input parameter of payee, it will use the default of unknown. Or if the user of this function does not give me a value for amount, or amount is not passed to this function when this function was called, then the default amount of 10 dirhams will be written on that check. And all this function does is it just returns this string, check payable to the payee for a certain amount. Okay. Now normally when you call a function, you should pass the required number of parameters. In this case, you should pass payee and amount to this function. But what if you call the function and the function is expecting two parameters, but you give it no parameters? You don't give it the payee and the amount. Then what default parameters allow you to do, if you forget those values or you omit them, it will put in these default values for you. So let's have a look what will be outputted when I call writeCheck without putting in these two parameters. Come on. Yeah, it says the check payable to unknown, which is the default, and for 10 dirhams, which is the default, if no parameters were passed. Let's only pass one parameter. Let's pass the name of the payee, but we'll omit the amount of the check. Let's see if this function will insert the default of 10 dirhams. Yes, it says check payable to John Miller, which is the parameter I passed, but I didn't pass the amount, so the function automatically inserted the default for me. Let's omit the name of the payee and only give it the amount. What will be outputted? Check payable to unknown, so it's going to use the default, and it's going to use the 45 that we passed. So this is a simple example of how if we omit parameters that the function is expecting, it won't crash the program, or you won't find an error in the program. The function will just insert the default values if those default values were defined when the function was created.